Hey guys, Master Geek here again. I need to start this review off with a minor retraction. In my review of the DM guidelines portion of the playtest package, I made a statement about how I kind of felt like Wizards of the Coast was trying to distance themselves from 4E with this particular edition. Well, as I look at the character sheets, which I'm sure you know you're watching the review of that right now, I discovered that I was actually incorrect. I'm not a big fan of 4th edition, at least not GMing it, but this part that they're carrying over from 4th edition into D&D Next is actually part of 4th edition that I really enjoyed, so I'm glad they're carrying it over. I'm not going to go into details on that right now because I'm going to touch on it later in this review, but I did want to make that statement right up front that I made an incorrect comment on an early review. Now this review had me really scratching my head about how to figure out how to put everything together. If I took each of the character sheets and did a review on them in one review, it would get pretty long and bulky. But if I took each character sheet and gave it its own review, things would tend to get repetitive and a little boring. So what I decided to do in the end is write up a general review of the character sheets as a whole, breaking it down into sections, layout, what each area means, etc. And then I am taking that review and I'm turning that into a video review, which is what you're watching right now. However, if you keep your eyes peeled, there's also going to be video reviews posted for each of the character sheets. So there's going to be 5 more video reviews coming up pretty quickly here. There will not be a written review version of these. This is going to be strictly video. So if you're interested in a specific character or character sheet, just keep your eyes peeled on the YouTube channel or on the site, and you'll see those video reviews starting to pop up pretty soon. The first thing I want to mention about the new character sheets is the exceptionally easy to read layouts. Right up in the upper left-hand corner, in nice, big, prominent numbers, you have the armor class and the hit points. You're not going to be searching in the middle of combat trying to figure out what an enemy needs to roll to hit you or how many hit points you can take in damage before you drop dead. From there, it breaks down into logically following sections for the rest of the character sheet. Again, much like with the hit points and armor class, if you're trying to look up numbers for your character on the fly during the game, you're going to find it's a lot easier to find exactly what you're looking for than it was in maybe some of the previous editions of D&D. The first section at the top of the page breaks down into description, experience points, abilities, attributes, sense, attacks, and languages. 7 small sections that take up maybe a third of the first page. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. The only area where there might be a little bit of confusion is the differences between attributes and abilities. And this is because in a lot of games, attributes and abilities are different words for the same thing. In D&D Next, the abilities are the numbered stats, the strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. The attributes are actually something slightly different. What these are is a character's speed, how far they can move in around, their hit dice. When they level up, that's what they roll to add to their hit points, or what they roll when they're trying to regain hit points with a healer's kit. And then initiative, what you would add or subtract to a roll when you're trying to figure out when exactly you go in combat. That's what the attributes are as opposed to abilities. And the next section on the first page is called Features, Background, and Theme. This is made up of information on the PC's race, class, background, and theme. Now, depending on the character sheet, the mechanical descriptions of the benefits of these areas is given at the bottom of this page or on page 2 if there is a second page to the character. After that comes equipment, loot, and spell information if the PC is able to cast spells. And then the next section is where the mechanical details of the features, background, and theme are given, as well as the benefits the PC gains upon reaching levels 2 and 3, respectively. The very last section of the character sheet is a place for playtesting notes, where the player can jot down pros, cons, ideas, etc. for when Wizards of the Coast sends them their surveys and questionnaires on how the playtesting went and ask for suggestions. Now, for the remainder of this review, I'm going to ignore the vast majority of the character sheet. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory and are nothing terribly new from previous iterations of Dungeons & Dragons. What I'm going to be focusing on is the areas that talk about the features, background, and theme of the characters. This section of the character sheet is really what's starting to get me excited for the game. And as I continue talking about it, you're going to notice that one particular section here is going back to touch on the part of 4th edition that's carrying over into D&D Next. Now, the first area that I'm going to talk about is race. This area gives a brief description of the character's racial culture. It also gives a list of the racial benefits the player character receives, if they receive any. Now, I'm taking this in order, so I'm going to touch a little bit more on these abilities below when I discuss the section that breaks these down into their numbers. Class is what comes up next. This area talks about exactly what it means to be the class listed on the character sheet, be it cleric, wizard, fighter, rogue. And it also gives a list of the class features that, again, I'm going to be discussing in more detail in the character sheet section below. Background features comes next. This is an interesting addition. It's basically the occupation of the character before they became an adventurer and how it affects them now. The benefits granted by a particular background may be mechanical or it may be strictly RP related. This is the first section of the character sheet that really got me feeling a bit excited about the system. There's only one character sheet that has a background feature that I would really consider something to have a mechanical effect on the game, and that's the fighters. The rest of the character sheets, their background features seem to have more of a role-playing or utility-centric benefit. Theme is the next section. This is where I retract the statement I made in my DM Guidelines review. This is actually one of the parts of 4th edition I thought was done quite well. This theme on the character sheets is essentially a description of the role the PC plays in the group. Remember in 4th edition how each class had a different build that you could take for them? Usually 2 different builds, at least in the core rulebooks, that you could choose between when making your character. The theme seems to be D&D Next version of that, and it grants benefits to the player based on what particular theme they choose. Obviously, the themes on the character sheets here are already picked out, but once it's finally released, I'm sure you'll be picking your own theme and applying it to your character. Racial features. Now, this is where the character sheet gets more in-depth on the racial benefits that are mentioned above when it just states the character's race. It takes each racial feature and explains what it means in a mechanical sense. Some things that you're going to see here will be familiar to those who played previous versions of Dungeons & Dragons. Some of these might actually be a little bit different and new, maybe something you haven't seen before for a race that you're used to seeing certain abilities for. Class features is next, and again, like racial features, this is where the sheet breaks down the class benefits mentioned above. It talks about spells, any special abilities that the class has, what armor, weapons they can use, etc. Background feature is the next section. This takes the background feature of the character and states the benefit it gives to the PC and possibly the rest of the party, depending on what the benefit is. As I stated above, this benefit may or may not have any kind of a mechanical effect on the game, and in fact only the fighter's sheet has a background on it with a mechanical feature, and even that one doesn't really grant any kind of combat bonuses or anything. And then the last section on the sheet is additional levels. This is the last portion of the sheet that I'm going to discuss in this review. This section details what the character gains as they hit levels 2 and 3 respectively. It details how to increase the character's hit points and states what additional benefits the character receives upon level up, whether it's new spells, special abilities, feats, etc. Now, as I did state earlier in this review, if I was going to touch on each sheet specifically, it'd come across as pretty repetitive. And my new plan is to do a video review on each of the character sheets that are sent with the playtest package. So just keep your eyes peeled for those videos. At this point, I am trying to decide if I'm going to wait until I finish my actual first playtest with my face-to-face group before I do the review on anything else after the character sheets, or if I'll do a review on the bestiary first. I know for sure I won't be reviewing the adventure that came with the package until I playtest it. Thanks for watching, guys. That's it for this review, and remember, just keep